Well, it's certainly that lull between the end of the college football regular season and, of course, the bowl season, but there's no shortage of things to talk about. Pete Mundo, Heartland College Sports Weekly, part of heartlandcollegesports.com. Thanks so much for joining us and being a part of this week's show, whether it's through the podcast, through the radio, through YouTube, whatever it might be. We appreciate you joining us. So someone pointed something interesting to me out on Twitter. Of course, I'm on Twitter at Pete Mundo. You can find the website on Twitter at Heartland_CS. And it was that every Big 12 team minus West Virginia is an underdog in their bowl game. And wondering, is that a reason? Is it just disrespect for the Big 12? What's behind all that? And, I got to looking at some of the games and thinking about it, and I think it's a mixture of a couple of different things. So first off, let me give you the spreads here of what we're looking at in the Big 12 Conference. Baylor is a 3.5-point dog against Vanderbilt in the Texas Bowl. I look at that, not shocked there at all. I mean, I love what Baylor did to close out the season. It's huge for Matt Rule's team, but it's a young team, never been in this kind of a situation before going to a bowl game. Vanderbilt had a decent year in the SEC, so not shocked by that. Iowa State, a 3.5-point dog against Washington State. That surprises me. Washington State down the stretch didn't play great, and I don't want to dive into each one of these games, but I'll just say that was a surprising number to me. Iowa State's going to have great home field advantage in that game because of how well Cyclone Nation travels, so that was a surprise to me. As we go on down the list, Oklahoma, an underdog against Alabama, not surprising at all. And nothing shocking to me there. 14-point dogs, little surprised by the number, but not shocking to me. Oklahoma State, over a touchdown underdog against Missouri. Also surprised by the number, not surprised at all that they are an underdog. Texas, also almost 2 touchdowns against none other than Georgia. Surprised by the number, not surprised by the fact that they're an underdog considering they're taking on an SEC powerhouse, a team that had Alabama on the ropes in the SEC championship game. And then Cal against TCU is a pick'em, and West Virginia the only favorite against Syracuse in the Camping World Bowl. A couple of things here. First off, a lot of this comes down to SEC bias. I know that surprises you that might exist. I say that tongue-in-cheek because we all know it's a weekly thing on this show. But the fact that there's so many Big 12 SEC matchups, there's 4 of them, right? You have Baylor taking on Vanderbilt. You have Oklahoma State taking on Missouri. And then you have OU taking on Alabama. And then you have Georgia taking on Texas. So right there, the SEC teams are going to get an inherent advantage. Why? Because they're the SEC. Vegas loves them. People love to bet them. There's a bias there, whether it's obvious or not. So that's part of the reason either an SEC team is favored or at least favored by such a wide margin. I wouldn't get into it too much because I'd come to expect it at this point, right? I mean, I'm not sitting here shocked that the SEC is getting so much love heading into bowl season. It happens every year. Then they end up, losing more games than people expect. And the excuse is always this. Like when Alabama lost to Oklahoma in that Sugar Bowl game back in, I guess that would have been 2012. People basically said, well, because Alabama is not playing for a national championship game, you know what? They don't care. I guarantee you, if Texas beats Georgia in the Sugar Bowl this year, people are going to say, well, Texas wasn't motivated. They played for a national title last year. They thought they got hosed by the College Football Playoff Committee this year. They were just not into it. Every year this happens. Let's not kid ourselves. Every year we have this conversation. It's always a problem. It's always an issue. The same storyline, just rinse, recycle, repeat, is always used by the SEC homers. So none of that surprises me. So I don't think it's an anti-Big 12 thing when I looked at some of the spreads and the fact that the Big 12 was only favored in one of its bowl games. What it does do, though, if you look at it for the Big 12, is it creates a massive opportunity. Because if you're only picked, you had 7 teams make a bowl game, right? 2 Kansas schools didn't get there, and then Texas Tech. 7 teams make a bowl game. You're favored in one of them. Now, I don't want to see the Big 12 go 1-6 in this bowl season. I will be very disappointed if the Big 12 only wins one of its bowl games, especially since the one game they're favored in, West Virginia, the Mountaineers don't have, the best player on the team in Will Grier. He decided not to play. But I hate to put it like this, but it does build in a little bit of, I don't want to use the word excuse, but it gives a little bit of room to say, you know what? You were underdogs in 6 of the games. It's too bad, but you won a game you were supposed to win. You lost the games you were supposed to lose. You had a tough draw in the bowl season this year. I'm not going to be happy with that. I certainly think when it comes to covering the spread, the Big 12 is going to have a very good bowl season. Heck, they might even, win a handful of these games. But it always, and it will come down to especially the big games. You think about it, the Big 12 is facing the 2 teams that met in the SEC championship. Most people would say, without a shadow of a doubt, the best 2 teams in that conference in Alabama and Georgia. And they're facing 2 Big 12 opponents. That's a huge opportunity for this conference. If you win one of those games, that's a massive success. Now, if you put a gun on my head and said which one, should Big 12 fans want to win, it's the obvious one. It's Oklahoma against Alabama. If the Sooners go out there and beat Alabama, you are going to have a different level of respect. It does a couple things. First off, the win against Alabama is enormous. Secondly, it finally gets the Big 12 into the national championship game. I know OU has been in the college football playoff 3 of the past 4 years, but, they lost to Clemson. And then they lost to Georgia last year, a game that I would imagine Lincoln Riley's had a lot of nightmares about since it took place. If you slay Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide in this game, which, by the way, is the second game on Saturday, December 29th, so it's the primetime game. If Lincoln Riley can slay the Alabama Dragon and beat Nick Saban, my goodness, the respect level, not just for Riley, not just for OU, but for the Big 12 goes through the roof. If you're a Kansas football fan and you're just like, man, I hope Les Miles can win us 2 games next year, you should be sitting down watching that game rooting for Oklahoma, because that's how big that game is for the conference. And you can make a similar argument for what's going on with the Texas Longhorns. If Tom Herman in year 2 can pull off a win against Jake Fromm, against Kirby Smart, that defense, that Georgia Bulldogs team, once again, the Big 12 credibility skyrockets. That's why when I did the rankings last week for Big 12 bowl games, people were getting on me for putting Missouri and Oklahoma State so high on my list. It's the Big 12. It's the SEC. I want to win those games. I'm sorry. I want to win that game a hell of a lot more than I want to beat Cal in the Cheez-It Bowl. I love TCU, but it doesn't have the same pull to me. It doesn't have the same sway to me as some of these other games in the conference. And people say, well, these bowl games are overrated. We put too much stock into them. I don't think we do. Fan bases are juiced up. The players are jacked up typically. You can find an occasional case where a team is not into a game. I'm curious what level of the West Virginia is into its game. Will Greer's not playing. Dana Holgerson, they've had some issues in these bowl games of late, whether it's the Heart of Dallas Bowl last year, the Camping World Bowl 2 years ago against Miami. Bowl games are not Dana Holgerson's friend, okay? They're just not. But for most teams, they get jacked up for these games. The players are into them. Considering they are exhibitions, and I know people get on the idea of exhibition games time and time again when it comes to college football bowl games, they're exciting. They're entertainment. They're good for the players. You get the extra weeks of practice. They're good for the fans. Some people make a little, holiday vacation out of it, which is always a fun time. It's good for the TV networks. It's a win-win. People are sitting home between Christmas and New Year's. They got nothing to do. They're dying to get away from, their extended family, their wacky Uncle Joe, and college football and bowl games end up being a savior for a lot of us. So, when I get ready for bowl season and I'm looking at the schedule for the Big 12, it's not as good as last year because last year you had 9 teams. Everybody except Kansas made a bowl game, which was awesome. Not quite that level of depth this year in the Big 12, but to see TCU come on late, get a bowl game, to see Baylor come on late, get a bowl game. It's a way to also look to the future of this conference, If you were to tell me which one team in the Big 12 could benefit most from this bowl season and can really launch them into 2019, it's the Baylor Bears. It's Matt Rule. To go from scandal to one win to bowl eligibility with a young team, with explosive weapons on offense, with improving weapons on defense, to get the 3 weeks of practice to beat an SEC opponent in your home state down the road in Houston, that can do wonders for 2019 for these young guys. So, that's why it's always a look to the future as well for me. That's what I enjoy so much about these bowl games. And you know what? When the bowl games end, guess what? Then you have a little bit of downtime. Then you got signing day part 2 in February. And before you know it, we're in the spring practice. By the way, you squeeze in March Madness in between if you're a hoops fan. The season doesn't end. And that's what I love about it too. It extends the season for a lot of teams, a lot of fans, for us in the media. It's just, I love everything about it. Well, coming up, we are going to get into some influential voices, apparently, in college football that might be ready for, an expanded college football playoff. We'll get to that and much more coming up right here on Heartland College Sports Weekly, part of heartlandcollegesports.com. All right, YouTube, thanks for joining us. Please do subscribe to the YouTube page there. Share it, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you soon here on heartlandcollegesports.com.